I hope many of you know, we at Generations United received a 5-year, $10 million cooperative agreement from the Administration for Community Living. We're in partnership with them, along with a number of other national partners and subject matter experts like Dr. Crumbley, to provide technical assistance or help to an array of government agencies. You'll see them all listed there and in that umbrella graphic, and organizations around the country that are working for and with the families. We're not designed to help the families directly. What we aim to do is to share promising practices, provide training opportunities, provide individual assistance and the like, so that those in the field, in the states, in the tribes, who know the families the best can provide services that are informed by the practices of others. So how we help, we provide webinars such as this one, and you'll see a link on this slide deck, which you will be receiving. That'll take you to the page on our website that lists all our upcoming webinars. We provide individual assistance. So that means if you have just a quick question about, for example, who's got a good family finding policy to find kin when children are removed from their homes by child welfare? You email us that question, we will find you some examples. We also do more involved individual assistance. Recently, we got a request from a state that wants to begin a Kinship Advisory Council statewide. So we connected them through a learning collaborative call and discussed it with other states that have longstanding and new advisory councils to help inform them and help guide them, so we can make those peer connections as well. And we have a new website that hosts a lot of new resources. This is what the website looks like, and the link is on the bottom. And you will see that we have grand fact sheets, which are fact sheets that you can share with caregivers that you work with or that you can use yourself, for your state, for Puerto Rico, for Virgin Islands, for the District of Columbia, that list programs and services for the families and supports, and they're jurisdiction specific. We also have a general fact sheet that can help, especially if you're making the case about supporting these families, kinship and grandfamilies. And we use those terms interchangeably to mean grandparents, other relatives, and close family friends who raise children when parents can't. So if you need it for educating the community, educating new stakeholders, it's a good resource. We also have three 3-minute each caregiver videos that you're welcome to use free of charge in trainings, when you're spreading the word. They're very impactful, and we're very proud of them. We did them in collaboration with our partners 0 to 3. We have a latest resources, which is tips to agencies and organizations on how to effectively, meaningfully include the family voices in your programmatic decision making, and really have them at the table and help them inform and collaborate with them to inform your policies, programs, and practices. And there's links on the bottom of each of these slides. We have monthly resources that we're putting out now. We're going to be putting out our March one shortly. They began they began in January, I think, or December, anyway, recently. And they're just short pieces. They alternate between directed at professionals and directed at caregivers, but they all of them can help professionals and folks working with the families. So I encourage you to look for those. And then to get all these resources in your inbox, so you know what we've got recently available, please sign up for our monthly newsletter, which there's a link on this page as well as the QR code. And again, you'll be getting these slides. And it is my pleasure now to turn over the presentation to Dr. Crumbley, Joesph Crumbley, who's a renowned kinship expert. I know all of you likely know him. He's been providing trainings nationally and internationally for decades. He's a real joy and a gift to work with. And he recently developed a video series entitled The Inherent Strengths of Kinship Care. And for information about that training, please visit his website, which is drcrumbley.com. With that, Dr. Crumbley, I turn it over to you, and thank you for joining us.
Oh, Anna, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be back again. The first time I was with the network was in September of last year, and I had an opportunity to present on family dynamics. And as Anna has said, since then, I've produced a series of training, and the training is entitled The Inherent Strengths in Kinship Families. And in that training, I've been able to produce 6 modules. And what I'm actually doing today is presenting one of those modules on kinship care. And that particular module will be the inherent strengths in kinship care. And we will be looking specifically at co-parenting in kinship families. I'd like to cover really 4 things today. The first would be, what are the prerequisites that you might want to address if you're involving birth parents and relative caregivers together in parenting? The second thing I'd like to address is, what are the approaches you might be able to use in order to get the caregiver and the birth parents buy-in to co-parenting? Because I think a lot of people assume that both may want to, but there's a possibility that there may be some resistance and some hesitation. The third thing I want to do is talk about, what are those guidelines that you might want to consider in making co-parenting work in kinship care. And the fourth thing I'm going to want to look at is, how do you manage those challenges that caregivers and relative caregivers and birth parents might experience because of pre-existing history? And the fifth thing is, what's the criteria that you might want to use and consider in assessing whether or not the family is ready for co-parenting? So let me start with the very first item, and that is how to get buy-in. Believe it or not, a lot of caregivers may be a bit resistant to co-parenting because of past history, because of past involvement, because of stressors within the family. So I'd like to have you listen to a video where I'm speaking to caregivers about why they might want to consider co-parenting with birth parents. And I want you to listen to this video, listening for what might be some of the challenges and what you might want to consider in your conversations with caregivers that may make them want to engage with birth parents in kinship care. So Anna, whenever you're ready. Thank you. Now I'd like to ask you a question. This may sound like a strange question, especially when I'm supposed to be talking about how to work together with birth parents. But here's the question. What are some of the reasons, and what would be some of the concerns that would make you consider not wanting to co-parent with the birth parent? And I'll repeat that. What are the reasons, what are the fears that would make you consider not wanting to work or co-parent with the birth parent? So if you would, take a few minutes and put that in the chat. And Candy, I'm going to turn it over to you, okay, at this point to, if you could kind of summarize what some of the responses are to that question. Reasons, fears, and concerns that would make you not want to co-parent with the birth parent.
Okay. We already have some coming in. One says, they assaulted me and the children.
Wow.
I fear that I would always be blamed for the problems.
Okay.
Every family needs a head.
Okay.
They are always high.
Wow. Okay.
They never stick to their word. They are unreliable.
Okay.
Can't trust them.
Safety issues.
Fear they may take the children and run.
Wow. Okay.
the exposure to violence and outside forces.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where they are, so I can't contact them.
All right.
Okay.
Okay. Pretty comprehensive and legitimate reasons. The reason why, I was getting ready to tell you the reason why I asked those questions, but I'd like you to answer it. And I'd like you to answer it by me telling you a story about a caregiver. This was a caregiver that pretty much listed just what you did. The safety issues, the broken promises, being in cycles of addictions, not knowing where the birth parents were, afraid of abductions, sabotaging, homelessness. But yet and still, this was a caregiver that would at least twice a year go out, find, track down the birth father, and would take a phone to him and ask him to do two things. Call or either text right there with her, the child, his daughter, and say, I love you, I'm thinking about you, and listen and help your grandma. That's it. That's all she would ask him to do. I love you, I'm thinking about you, listen and help your grandma. Now, with all those problems that you just listed and reasons, which were very similar to hers, why does she still do that? Let me ask the question this way. What is it that she felt he could give the children that she couldn't? That's the question. What is it that she felt he could give the children that she couldn't? And why did she track him down? So if you could just take a few minutes to answer that question, then we can kind of summarize it. So Candy, I'm going to turn it back over to you again. And again, the question is, what is it that she felt he could give the children that she couldn't?
I have the child needed to know that her father loved her. They mattered to their birth parent, validation.
Wow. Okay.
Grandma can't be dad.
Wow. You just hit it's that last one. That was the reason why she couldn't go out. Why she had to go out and find him. She realized, and for a lot of caregivers, I think it can be very frustrating, how can you love someone that isn't taking care of you? How can you love someone who hurt you? How could you love someone that you've never ever lived with? And that's why I asked that question, and that's what she realized. Even with the child loving someone who didn't care, loving someone that they didn't live with, loving someone who was hurting them, why would this child still need them? And you just hit it on the head. That birth parent was able to provide love. That birth parent was able to provide a sense of belonging. And the birth parent also provided normalcy for that child. That child at some point wants to feel like every other child, like I have a parent. So I think when caregivers realize that, the importance of it, then you can assign those roles that I have listed here. And I have to thank Tia Maria Smith. She's the director of the Pennsylvania Can Connect program for putting this beautiful guide together and this graphic, because it looks at all the various roles that I talked about. For this, I'll ask you another question. What role did this grandmother assign to the father who she found twice a year? Would anybody like to take a shot and use their chat? What roles or role?
Contact person.
That's it. He was a voice on the phone, and he was a sentence in the text. I love you. I'm thinking of you. Listen to grandma and help her when she needs it. Would anybody like to explain to me what was significant about that very short script that he had? I love you.
I'm thinking about you. Listen to grandmom and help her when you can and when she needs it. What was he saying?
He's validating and giving permission for grandma to be in care.
Excellent. You're going back to those prerequisites. I love what you're doing. Right. It's back to that list. Please continue, Candy. Yep. So validating grandmom's power.
Gave grandma that authority she needed to care for the child.
That's right. Delegated that authority. Any other ones, Candy?
Nope, that's it.
Okay. All right. Delegated the authority. Validated the authority. So delegated the authority by saying, listen to grandmom. Validated the authority, by saying grandmom can take care of you. And at the same time gave the children permission to accept the authority. Listen to grandmom. And at the same time gave the children permission to make that attachment. Help her when she needs it.
Thanks, Anna. Okay. I'd like to talk about the roles. And Ro, if you would, could you go to the PowerPoint that I have on parenting issues? Okay. All right. Let me go back to, if you remember, there was a point where I mentioned prerequisites in that video. And I talked about prerequisites that father was going through in those very brief sentences that he had, and then a communication with his children. So I'm going to start there. Prerequisites. Now, as you hear me go through these prerequisites, what I'm going to do is give you the ideal prerequisites, and then I'm going to follow up with what are the more realistic prerequisites that birth parents can do. And these are prerequisites that we're talking about birth parents being able to meet if they're going to be involved with their children and with caregivers. The ideal first starts off with birth parents being able to validate the caregiver's authority and their competency. And the way they could do this is in their dialogue with children, because all of these prerequisites are going to be based on birth parents' dialogues with the children. And then this first one, in validating the caregiver's authority, it sounds like this. Your aunt and uncle are now responsible for taking care of you. They're going to be able to take good care of you the way that I would have it as well. So basically, it's validating their competency and at the same time, validating their authority. And again, this is a dialogue between birth parent and child. The second thing that ideally you would want would be to defer authority to the caregiver. And that sounds like this in the conversation. They're going to take care of you and protect you the same way I would. Could you go on to that next slide, bro? When they speak for me. That's the crucial part when you're talking about deferring the authority of the birth parent to that of the caregivers. When they speak for me, and they now have authority over you. The third, again, ideal would be for the birth parent to give the child permission to accept the caregiver's authority. And that sounds like in this dialogue, I want you to trust and obey them the same way you would trust and listen to me. So again, the first one is validating their authority of the caregivers. The second one is deferring the birth parent's authority to the caregiver. And then this third one is giving the child permission to accept the caregiver's authority so that the child won't feel any issues of split loyalties and dual loyalties or feelings of betrayal. That's why that third piece is so important. And then the fourth one is being consistent. And the way that sounds is the same rules you would follow in their homes are the same rules you will follow if you were with me. We both want the best for me. Now, again, it's ideal because if they did have the same rules, the child would probably still be with the birth parents. I understand the chuckle if there's anyone in the audience doing that right now. But basically, it's the caregiver giving the child, again, permission and it's the birth parent giving the child permission to accept the rules. And at the same time, what we have here is the birth parent validating and supporting the rules in the home of the caregiver. And the fifth and final one, which would be the next one, Ro, is giving the child to bond and attach to the adoptive parent. And in this case, we're talking about the caregiver. And that conversation sounds like this. I want you to accept, I want you to ask for help with problems the same way you would ask me. You can trust them to help you and care for you the same way I love you. So again, gives the child permission to accept the nurturance, to accept the affection, to accept the bonding, and to be able to reciprocate. Now, I'm going to sound like I'm contradicting myself now. In reality, it's very difficult for birth parents to do all four of these five prerequisites. And this is even probably more realistic. What you may have to do is just the opposite. You may have to get the birth parent to talk about, well, better yet, to be aware of what not to say. That's what this approach is going to be about that I'm going to say to you. I'm thinking about conversations where I would be with the birth parent and I would say, well, can you tell the children that the caregivers are now the authority figures and that they should listen to them? And the caregivers and the birth parent's response to me was, I can't do that. I'm the child's parent. I'm the authority figure. Nobody else can be the authority figure for them. So I would reverse it and then say, well, can you at least tell the children not to run away or to not defy them or not to break their rules? Because that's the only place they have to stay right now. Okay, I can do that. I guess my whole point is that the birth parent may not be able to say those ideal statements, but you may have to get the birth parent to talk about what's realistic for the children and what they can handle. I'm even going to want to go one step further. I would even say sometimes to the birth parent, well, can you at least tell the child not to take off? Will you at least tell the child that it's not okay to run away? So again, sometimes it's important for birth parents to know not only what to say, but also what not to say. So that's what this approach is all about in terms of giving the birth parent choices and helping them know how to use their power and influence to accept the relative caregiver's authority. How about the one, if you saw, I had one about being able to, when the caregiver speaks, they speaks for me, being able to say that. I can't say that. I can't tell them children to listen to those children, to have them listen to me the same as way that they listen, have them listen to the caregiver the same way they listen to me. I can't do that. I don't want them to feel as though that anybody else can tell them what to do. Well, can you at least not tell them to talk back to the caregiver? Can you at least tell them not to disrespect the caregiver? Can you at least tell them to follow the rules the same way as if they lived with you? Okay, I think I could do that. So again, it's kind of like going in reverse. It's kind of not only telling them what to say, but also what not to say, what behaviors to condone and what behaviors not to condone. So I just want to offer this to the professionals in the audience, ways of engaging birth parents and being able to give the children permission to accept the caregiver's authority, to be able to defer their authority to the caregivers, to be able to allow the children to attach to caregivers, and to be able to give children the permission to bond with the caregivers and to accept their rules. So it's looking at these prerequisites in terms of not only in terms of coaching birth parents in what to say, but also coaching birth parents in knowing what not to say, and how to use their influence and how to use their power. All right, let me stop here and ask Anna if she's getting any questions from the participants, because I'd like to try to keep this interactive as well. So Anna, if you're getting any questions, please let me know.
I do not see any questions yet. No. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right. If you do have any questions or response to the video or questions in response to these prerequisites, please put them in the chat, and then Anna can ask them while I'm presenting. Okay. All right. What I'd now like to do is look at the roles that birth parents can have in in shared parenting. And again, I just want to go back a little bit in terms of what we've just looked at. I think what's important to realize is in order for co-parenting and shared parenting to work, caregivers have to believe that it can work. And that's why I wanted to play that initial piece, because you saw reasons why caregivers did not think it should work and reasons why caregivers didn't want to co-parent. So for you as a professional, it's going to be important to talk to caregivers and make sure that they're willing to give co-parenting a chance and to see if they in fact believe co-parenting has a place in their life. That example that I gave you looked at a birth parent with all the reasons why a caregiver may not want to parent or share parent with the birth parent. But even with all those reasons, you heard me share a story about a caregiver who still approached the birth parent with all those problems because they were able to identify what that parent was able to give to the children that they couldn't give. And you may have to have that conversation with caregivers in order for them to appreciate what a birth parent with all the problems in the world can still do that they can't do. For caregivers that may be watching this that may be attending this webinar, I wanted to present that scenario to you because you may know of birth parents who have those problems, but still you can still ask yourself a question: what can that birth parent do for the child that I cannot do? Because in being able to ask that question, you might then be able to identify what are the roles that that birth parent can have in the child's life. So now what I'd like to look at is, what are those roles? What do they look like? You know,
Dr.
what's the
Crumbley, may I stop you for a second? Because we did
yes.
get a couple of
Oh,
questions.
great. Terrific.
They're actually in the chat, and it's easier for us to keep track if people put them in the Q&A. But anyway, here's the question. How is
Okay.
this different when the child has only known living with the caregiver? And it's a bit delayed, so I'm not sure what this is referring to, but maybe you do.
Yeah, I think I do. This refers to the questions that I asked about how can a child miss someone that they never lived with, love someone that they never lived with, need someone that they've never been involved with, or even care for someone who may in fact have hurt them. So that's kind of what's behind that question, and I really appreciate that question. Even with all, and I respond by saying that even with all the negative interactions that that child may have had with the birth parent, even with never actually having lived with that birth parent, there is still the fantasies that children have around the questions of what would it be like to be with my parent? What are my parents like? So there are those questions related to fantasy. There are also those issues related to wanting to be like other children and being able to say, I have a parent, that I belong, that I have a connection, that I have someone in my as a parent who cares for me. So that could be the motivation for why a child who has never known or lived with their birth parent would want to still be involved and know their birth parents. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Dr. Crumbley. We have a few more.
Okay.
You tell me if you want to table them for later, but should we proceed with
Yeah,
questions?
please.
Okay. How do you address incarceration with a kinship child?
Wow. I think there's another question behind that question, which is, can a parent parent their child even if they're incarcerated? Do children have needs for their parents even if their parents are incarcerated? And my answer to both is yes. But let me start with the question that you asked. How do you talk to children about incarceration? Okay. Oh, this is a great question. I'm just thinking about a birth parent, a caregiver who talked to the child about parents being incarcerated. And this is what it sounded like. You know, when you get in trouble, you know, I have punishments for you, don't I? Yes, you do. You know, when you get in trouble, sometimes I may take away your privileges. There may be times when I even have you take time out. There frequently always going to usually be consequences for your behaviors. True? Yep. Well, guess what? Grown-ups sometimes get punished for their mistakes just like kids do. or just like teenagers do. Grown-ups also have consequences for their behaviors and for their decisions. You know how sometimes I'll have you take time out? Yeah. Well, grown-ups can also have time and privileges taken from them as well, just like I take time and privileges away for you. And when grown-ups have privileges taken away from them, that frequently means that they will sometimes have to be incarcerated, which means lose their freedom, go to jail, not be able to go where they wanted to go, do what they want to do, and that's what incarceration is. So incarceration is consequences to grown-ups when they don't follow the rules. What you think of that? Caregiver was on the money, wasn't she? So if I was going to talk about incarceration, I think for caregivers, it means being able to give children explanations for why parents are there. Another possibility is to talk about consequences for decisions that are inappropriate or harmful to others. And again, use examples in the children's life, and that helps them understand it better. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Dr. Crumbley. We have a number of questions, but I'll just ask you one more this time,
Okay, Anna.
kind of a
Yes.
follow-up.
Okay.
What if parents are incarcerated due to the fact that their abuse, neglect resulted in one of the siblings dying, but they still miss them and they long to be with them?
I think, again, I guess I'm thinking right now of a situation where I worked with a birth parent who was incarcerated because of actually infanticide. And I think, in fact, I know what we actually did was, rather than me explain it, we actually had the birth parent explain it, because the child wanted to know, Mom, why did you do it? And Mom was able to say, I made a mistake. It was inappropriate. I was angry. I was on drugs. So I think honesty is the first part of that first question, in terms of how people can make mistakes because of not thinking of consequences, how people can make mistakes without thinking of how they can hurt other people. And I think what's extremely important in that is also talking about how I can still miss you, even though I'm here and I'm incarcerated, and how I can miss my sibling because I can miss people that aren't with me. It's your not being with me is why I miss you. It's your not being with me to do things with, to play with, to engage with, to laugh with, to grow up with. That's what I'm missing. So it's talking about what you miss and other ways of how to handle the hurt so that it's not destructive to yourself, and how other ways we're going to still be involved. But for that birth parent, if they're talking about it, it's frequently being able to start off with admitting I made the mistake and that I was wrong and what I've learned from it. And giving that child the opportunity to be angry about it and to question them about it and to hold them responsible for what they did. I think that's also that the birth parent has to be strong enough to allow it to happen as well.
Thank you, Dr. Crumbley.
Sure. Okay, I guess I better move along. Wow, these questions are better than my presentation, but that's great. Write your questions down. Anna does a good job of letting me know how many I can handle and keep me moving. So just write down what you're thinking. Anna will monitor them. And Anna, if you think that there are enough that I should address, please let me know. Okay. All right. Ro, I'm going to look at, if you would, in this same PowerPoint, I'm going to look at the roles of birth parents. So if you could just kind of scroll through, you can scroll through that. Yep, keep scrolling. Perfect. Okay, back up one row. Thank you. There's a formula behind the parental roles that birth parents should assume, and the formula is that the roles should match the birth parent's capacity, that the roles should match the birth parent's abilities to parent. And this first one, I've identified as the role is as a contact person. If you think about that scenario that I talked about earlier, where we had a birth parent that was homeless, that was in an addiction, that wasn't able to be found, that couldn't keep promises, all the things that that were listed by relative caregivers as to why they wouldn't want to parent. One of the things that was real clear was that this person at this point could only be a contact person. And that's basically all they are, a contact person, a voice over the phone, emails in letters, photos. And it makes sense if you think about it. They're not accessible. You can't get in touch with them. They have difficulties keeping promise, but they do meet the needs of the child in terms of knowing that they have a parent, knowing that they're loved, and knowing that they belong. Here's what that conversation sounds like. Think back to the video you were just watching. Hi, babe. I love you. Hope you're okay. Take care of yourself. Listen to grandma. I love you. And that's it. And in fact, you also had the caregiver right there listening to the conversation on the phone, or they're watching the text. And that's basically all you want at this point. But as a contact person, they're providing, again, the children the permission to listen to you. As a caregiver, they're providing a sense of belonging to that child, a sense of normalcy to that child in terms of being like other children and having someone to care, and at the same time, validating that child's relationship with the caregiver. So it's simply a contact person. The next role is as a friend. I'm thinking, and I'm sure you've all met birth parents that are able to be better friends to their children than parents. They're better at being friends than parents. They know the latest dances. They notice they're aware of rules. They know the most common music. They're able to relate as friends, but have difficulty with setting limits, having difficulty setting boundaries, having difficulties being able to follow through. All the things that go along with being a parent. Difficulty dealing with being the disciplinarian, difficulty not being liked. So that's what I mean by supportive friends. And that conversation sounds like this. Yeah, babe, how you doing? What's going on? What are you doing in school? Did you see that latest movie? Yeah, how about that dance? Oh, yeah, let me see your TikTok. Oh, what's going on? I love that dress. How did you fix your hair that way? Look at your nails. They can talk as friends. And that's basically the relationship that they have with the child, where they're acting many times more as peers than as parent-child. So that's the supportive relationship that you want. And again, you may need to monitor the phone calls, be there where they're having the conversation, but that's the relationship. They're more like friends than parent-child. I find that frequently occurring where there's been situations of role reversal. So if you have that occurring within the relationship of the birth parent and the child, this might be a role that's more comfortable and more compatible with the skills and the capacity of that birth parent. And contact person, again, the capacity is one of just being available and just having contact and maybe having a verbal relationship because of their physical challenges, emotional challenges. And the second one, we're looking at an individual who maybe have problems with boundaries. And their capacity at this point is just to be a friend. In the third role, I'm talking about perhaps brainstorming and being a confidant to the child. And this is a birth parent that's able to be a good friend, that maybe has some limits in terms of only being a contact person and can brainstorm. But basically what they're doing, conversation sounds like this. Oh yeah, so what's going on? How you doing? Are you having any problems? What's happening? And here's the key to that role. The birth parent simply redirects the child back to, guess who? The caregiver. That's what's crucial in that role. Listening, compartmentalizing, allowing the child to ventilate, and then redirecting the child back to the caregiver. This validates the caregiver's role, validates the caregiver's authority, and by just doing that one thing. Here's what that conversation sounds like. Yeah, so what's happening? How you doing? Okay. Last time I talked to you, you really sound upset about your boyfriend. Is everything over there? Okay, going there, okay? Still having problems? Well, you know what? It sounds to me like you should talk to mom, grandma, or talk to grandpa or aunt and uncle. So the goal, the role here is listening, allowing the child to ventilating, supporting the child, and here's the crucial part, redirecting the child back to the caregiver. Ro, the next one, please. That'll be the next slide. Excellent. Advisor, problem solver. This person, have you ever met birth parents? I used to sometimes see them in groups, in parenting groups. They were some of the best advisors. They could give great recommendations. They were able to provide excellent examples for members in the group, but guess what? They weren't able to practice what they preach. So that's what's happening here with the problem solver, with the advisor. This is the birth parent, bright, intelligent, able to give excellent advice, can consult, could probably run therapy sessions, but when it comes down to the discipline of doing what you say you're going to do, you know, the impulse control to follow through with what you say you're going to do, the ability to keep promises when you make them, to finish tasks when you start them, that's the problem. So again, they have the intellectual, they have the problem solving skills, but it's about putting it into practice, and that's where this particular caregiver, this particular birth parent, that's why they're pretty much the problem solver, and that might be the role that you advise them to be in. Now, in the next one, if you notice the disciplinarian, this caregiver is actually able. This person is actually probably at the point. The next three, they're probably at the point where they're having unsupervised visits. They're probably at the point where they're actually having visitations in their home. They're at the point where they're able to actually be involved with the children around consequences and helping that caregiver develop the consequences. That's what's happening with the disciplinarian. With the supervisor, they're again nurturing, and then if they're working as a provider or a protector, they're at the point where they're probably going to be moving into reunification. So Anna, let me stop there and see if anybody has any questions around the roles or additional roles that maybe they've used in their practices.
Thank you, Dr. Crumbley. Yes, we're getting a lot of excellent questions. Have there been any instances when you would not recommend co-parenting?
Oh, okay. Believe it or not, that's going to be my last topic for this presentation. So hold on to that question.
Okay, I will try
I'll
to
be
hold on to
addressing
that
that when you look at
question.
criteria.
What do you do when the parents are not, let me get this exactly right. In situations where for legal reasons, the parent's not to have contact with the child, how can co-parenting be handled?
I'm going to even be more explicit. I'm going to give you the example of the incarcerated parent or the parent that's being institutionalized. When we look at these roles that we're talking about, we have parents, again, these roles may fit the parents in those situations. The contact person may be a parent who is incarcerated or who is institutionalized, who at that point can just be a support or just a friend where they're not advising. They may be at the point in their recovery or at the point of their incarceration where they may not be able to put the child's needs before their own. And in that case, again, you'll match the role with their capacity. So these roles that we're talking about here, parents can still implement, maybe not behind bars or in institutional situations, disciplinarian. I've seen caregivers set it up so nicely. That's what's so nice about it. Caregivers can have the capacity to set up these roles very nicely. For example, the disciplinarian role, I've seen caregivers say, well, next time we go up to the visit, I'm going to ask mom and we're going to talk to her about what we should do if you stay out late. Or next time we see dad in rehab, we're going to sit down and talk about how and when you should use your phone. Or we're going to talk about what chores you're going to have around the house, what your rewards should be for doing and carrying out your chores. So these kinds of conversations around limit setting, around reinforcements, around consequences, advice. All this can be done institutionally and from behind bars. So I hope I answered that question.
We are getting a lot of questions about, the parents, if they have mental illness,
Mhm.
if they're addicted to opioids, if they have substance use disorders, and how you handle those kinds of parenting situations.
Mhm. It goes back to looking at whether or not that parent, you know what, maybe we need to, Anna, you know what, maybe I'm thinking about us going to the criteria. So why don't I switch to that right now? Ro, there's going to be something that says criteria for co-parenting. Could you pull that up? It's a PDF because it looks like there are a lot of questions around that right now. So I'm going to be flexible here.
Thank you, Dr. Crumbley.
Mhm. Oh, perfect. Number one, is the birth parent emotionally and physically stable enough to co-parent? Is the birth parent physically accessible? And by accessible, I mean, can you find them? Can you get in touch with them? Approachable? Will they make the child be afraid of them? Will they make the child feel defensive? Will they be frightening? Will they be presentable to their child? By that I mean, are they going to embarrass the child when the child sees them? By their smell, by their look, by their behaviors, by their actions. Children are so in depth. I've even had children say, "Oh, mom didn't take her medication today. Oh, dad, you see how dry his skin is? He's using again." So yeah, when we start looking at what's the criteria, yeah, let's start out with hands-on, what the children can see. So physically, is that birth parent accessible, approachable? And when I say presentable, I'm talking about not being an embarrassment to the child. I also want to put down there, are the parents able to keep appointments, to be there when they're supposed to be? And I'm talking about promises about home, room, not going to use again, but just being able to keep appointments. And then the third one, lucid, communicative, and able to be interactive with the child. Can they do activities with the children, physically, emotionally, verbally? So that's one criteria. And to me, that's one of the most basic criteria that you have to consider if we're talking about co-parenting. The second one is the birth parent able to accept their roles and guidelines provided as partners in sharing parenting? The first, there's a lot of loss and grief. If you notice, I have under that, there's a lot of loss and grief associated with new roles. There's a loss of power. There's a loss of status. There's a loss of identity. There's a loss of loyalty, relationships. There's a loss in terms of attachments. And here we're talking about, is the birth parent able to accept these losses if they're going to assume these roles? Because they have to accept the loss. They have to accept the grief. And by that, I mean being able to take it and to place it somewhere and to be able to place the needs of the child's over that of their own, because that's what they have to be able to do to cope with the loss and the grief and to have a place to take it. Bro, could you lift this up, scroll this up just a little bit for me? Great. Um, yeah, right there, perfect. Can the birth parent avoid making the child feel guilty or needing to support or console the birth parent because of their role? I'm specifically thinking about role reversal. I'm specifically thinking about parents not able to keep the boundaries and to be able to set the limits because of the loss and the grief they experience when they assume these new roles. So that's the other part that has to go along with that. Assuming the new roles, it sounds like I'm turning you into a therapist, and probably in order for birth parents to do this, they're going to have to get into some kind of help, some kind of therapy in order to be able to do that item number two. And then accepting those guidelines, for to be able to say, it sounds like you should talk to your grandmom or your grandfather about this, redirecting them back to the caregiver. That takes a lot of control. That takes a lot of self-discipline to be able to do that and to deal again with the loss and the grief, because the children are going to pick up on the fact that you don't want to do this, that you want to be the parent. The children are going to pick up the birth parents' difficulties in those situations. And the children, even if they don't even haven't lived with the birth parent, they're going to see the stress, they're going to see the feelings. And even if the birth parents were terrible in these roles, they're going to still see the discomfort. But is that birth parent able to give the child permission, back to those prerequisites, to accept the rules, accept the authority, and to defer their authority to the caregiver? Number 3, is the birth parent able to not triangulate the child, getting the child caught in the middle, undermining and competing with the caregiver's authority? Avoid sabotaging the child's relationship with the caregiver and causing the child to be confused in that triangulation. So that, again, keeping the child out the middle, not only verbally, but out of the middle emotionally as well. You know, the child needs permission to attach. The child needs a permission to bond. The child needs permission to accept the nurturance and the comfort from that caregiver, and the child needs permission to do so. The child needs to know that you can still love this caregiver, your grandmom, your aunt and uncle, and still not have to worry about me rejecting you or being angry about it or pulling back from you. I will still love you even if you love someone else. I won't feel offended. I won't feel threatened. And that's the emotional safety. Can that caregiver, can that birth parent provide that emotional space so that the child won't feel triangulated? All right, number 4, is the caregiver able to accept all right, this is the caregiver's work. Okay. And I'm going to go back after we deal with this section here on what the caregiver needs to do, what that dialogue needs to sound like between the caregiver and the birth parent. But is the caregiver able to allow co-parenting? Because they also have to, remember that first part, caregiver has to accept co-parenting as being something that's viable and that's necessary for the child. And that's what this number 4 is all about. This is the caregiver's work. Avoid undermining and competing with the birth parent, willingness to learn. And if they don't know how to do that, is there a willingness to learn? Because we can't expect caregivers to come into this knowing how to do this because they've never been caregivers before. We can't expect birth parents to know how to do this because they've never co-parented before. So is there a willingness, which means are they willing to accept that there is something to learn? Are they willing to accept the fact that the needs of the child require co-parenting? The child needs to see us work together as a team in order for them to feel safe. Number 5, thank you. Are caregivers and birth parents able to be in compliance with any legal guidelines or stipulations? Now, one of the challenges for caregivers is attachment. And I'll just have you answer this to yourself. A caregiver's initial experiences of attachment are with whom first? And I'll ask that again. The caregiver's initial experiences of attachment is with whom first? The child in their care or the birth parent? It's kind of a rhetorical question. I know most of you know this. And it's going to be, and it should be, the birth parent. Even if the attachment is negative, even if it's hostile, those first experiences are going to be with that birth parent. So when they have to then place the needs of the child before that of the birth parent, it can cause guilt. And it so frequently comes out when they have to enforce court orders, guidelines, and legal stipulations. It's difficult for them to say things like this. No, you can't come in. Even though I know you lived here and grew up, you can't come here because there's a court order. Or is their guilt going to get in the way? Or their loyalty going to get in the way of saying, okay, come on in. And all of a sudden, orders get twisted. Orders are defied. People are working around the orders. And the orders could be visitation, restraints, and even around termination orders. So it's the ability of the caregiver and the birth parent to still work within the confines of, and co-parent within the confines of the law and legal arrangements. So that's something that has to be looked at, because I'm sure you know folks that are in the field, and I'm sure a lot of caregivers know this, children have been removed because visitations weren't followed through, because birth parents were now living in the home because of eviction, because birth parents were violating orders related to how long they were to keep the children. Next thing you know, overnights were occurring. So it's being able to have caregivers and birth parents being able to work within the restrictions and guidelines of the law as well, because attachment and loyalty can get in the way. That's different from foster care and adoption, because clearly that foster parent and adoptive parent, their loyalty and their attachment is going to be with that child first. For caregivers, it starts with the birth parent, be it negative or positive, and then they have to transfer. Before, it was placing the needs of the birth parent over that of the child because they knew the birth parent first. Now you have to switch it. And again, this is something that can cause problems around the law and the legal stipulations and being able to work within that. Caregivers and birth parents' ability to attend joint meetings when necessary, and to be able to create a safe space for the children and for themselves. I think that is so crucial. Children will need to see caregivers and birth parents able to not be violent, be able to make them feel safe. This is one time where caregivers and birth parents have to realize that they have to be okay for the children to be okay. They have to present that unified front. Oh, by the way, the reference for this piece right here, just go back to your training around divorce and separation. And this should help you around assessing the family's ability to provide safe spaces and what those guidelines should look like. And number 7, is a child emotionally ready for co and shared parenting? This should probably be number 1, if I think about it, because you can do everything from 1 to 6, but if that child is not ready for co-parenting, it will not work. I'm sure we've all seen children as young as 4 and 5 years old that can sabotage parenting. They can also sabotage co-parenting. Is there trauma? I've got the list. Indications of trauma that could be triggered by the birth parent, the family, siblings, any indication of resistance or hesitation, and is there any sabotaging going on? So those are the observable behaviors that'll help you look at the child's readiness for co and shared parenting. Anna, I'm sure there are questions.
There are questions. You've got a lot of people who are interested in and appreciative of what you're talking about. Some general questions. I'm trying to put these in categories because there are so many of them. But how do you talk to the child if they don't want to talk to the parent? How do you talk to the child about any parental issues, like that they have mental health issues, which I think we touched on a little bit, but
Right.
basically, how do you get the child to cooperate?
Okay. It's funny. You see me laughing because a lot of times the conversation is one directional. It starts off with not looking for the children or requiring the children to dialogue with you about the birth parent. It usually frequently starts off with you bringing up the issues of the birth parent. You know what might be a good place to start with? Why are you living with me and not your parents? What was the situation that resulted in your coming into care, and my care specifically? And then talking about needs that the children have that the birth parent wasn't able to meet. If you can start questions around disclosure and explanations for why the child is with you, you can then segue into looking at the parent's behavior and the parent's actions that resulted in the children coming into care. So that can start the conversations around the parents, why they're there with you. And when you're talking about the parents, it's important to differentiate the difference between the quality of the parent from their decisions and their behaviors. Helping the children look at consequences of decisions without degrading the parent's quality. Here's what it sounds like. I'm getting so theoretical. It sounds like this. Mom and dad love you. They cared a lot for you. But many times when people are involved in using drugs or alcohol, it can affect how they care for themselves and care for their children. It gets in the way of making good decisions. I didn't put down mom. I didn't put down dad. We talked about their behavior and we talked about the consequences of behavior. So you were able to make that distinction. And that's a conversation about mom and dad. Also also segues into, now this is how they can still parent you. They can call you. They can make phone contacts with you, you know, because of, as a consequence. So it's looking at their behavior, how it resulted in them coming into care, what they're currently able to do while they cannot take care of you. Those become conversations that you can have with the children. And that can start as young as 4, 5, 6 years old.
Thank you, Dr. Crumbley.
Mm-hmm.
What about the case manager's role, or, the professional's role in this co-parenting process?
Here's another reason why I'm laughing. One of the things that drives professionals and the case managers crazy is trying to figure out who's my client. Is it the child? Is it the caregiver? Is the birth parent? And I'm going to say to you in kinship care, it's all three. So for the case manager, it's a lot of the work is getting the caregiver, because caregivers are not necessarily going to be receptive to co-parenting. So you may have to start off the way I started off this training with, what are some of the reasons you don't want to? And in all those reasons, is there still a role? With the birth parent, all right, I'll even be more specific. You've got to start off by finding a common need between the caregiver and the birth parent. For the birth parent, the common need frequently is, I need a place for my children to stay until I can get them back. That's their need. A need for the birth parent, for the caregiver, is, I want to be able to be there for the child and give you an opportunity to get yourself together so that you can get back. So it's finding that common need, and even sometimes using the common fear. Now, I know that sounds real strange. For a lot of the birth parents, it's the fear that you're not going to give me a second chance and allow the children to come back to me. And you're going to sabotage that relationship. The reverse is, for the caregiver, you're going to sabotage that relationship that I have with the child, and you're not going to let them make the connections with me. So what can we do to alleviate the fears? So a lot of times it's the common denominator around fear and the common denominators around needs that become the first point that you want to begin with. What are the mutual benefits of us working together? So I think that's a good place to start as case managers in terms of getting birth parents and caregivers to work together. What is our common needs? How can we help each other out with our fears and meeting those needs? In kinship care, there's also that leverage of, how can I, as a caregiver, help you not only as a parent, but as my son, daughter, sister, brother, cousin, friend. That's unique. That's a unique strength in kinship care that caregivers need to use when they're finding what's that common need. So I think I hope that's a start. The next thing that goes after that, I should also emphasize, is the caregiver acknowledging the power and the strength and the influence that birth parent has. It goes back to that question. There are things that you can give this child that I can't, or there are things that you can give this child in a way that's better than the way I can. And acknowledging with that birth parent their strengths, their influences, and how they can now work together as a couple, how they can now work together as partners. The third thing that managers can work with around co-parenting is being able to dismantle the past. That past can haunt caregivers and birth parents. And that's one of the things that you don't have to worry about in foster care and adoption. They don't have a pre-existing relationship. But in caregivers, as a case manager, talking about dismantling and reconstructing that interaction, and you dismantle and reconstruct it by having this kind of a conversation, getting them to talk about what they're going to do different from the past now that the children are with them, how are they going to change their relationship with each other? Basic things like, now, the next time I see you, I'm going to talk civil to you. And in front of the children, this is how I'm going to act. And I'm going to talk to you in a respectful way. I am going to involve you in setting up the discipline around the children. So it's those kinds of conversations in terms of, we weren't able to do this in the past, but we're now going to do this now. And that caregiver being able to take the first step, because the birth parent only has very fragile dignity. Take the first step in terms of dismantling and talking about what you're going to do differently and how. So let me stop with that. And I think I covered 4 or 5 things for that case manager. I got y'all working. But yeah, that's what it starts with. Identifying what's our common needs, acknowledging the strengths of that birth parent, dismantling the past, how we're going to renegotiate new behaviors. And I think the 5th one should be the case manager being able to help that caregiver develop sympathy, empathy with the birth parent, and using their relationship as a relative. I want you to be successful, not only as the parent, but also as my son, daughter, sister, brother, friend.
Thank you, Dr. Crumbley.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Well, we have quite a few, but I
Okay.
want to note that you only have about 20 minutes left. We only have about 20
Oh,
minutes left together, so up to you.
okay. All right. Let's see. Why don't we go to, let's see. All right. Ro, if you go back to the inherent strengths in kinship care, if you go back to that PowerPoint, and if you go to, let's see, I think I have some PowerPoints that show approaches, and then I have some scripts, Ro. Oh yeah, there you go, Ro. Yeah, just scroll on through. Mm-hmm. Because I think if the people see the PowerPoint, they'll know exactly what I just talked about. You keep on going, keep on going. Yeah, just scroll, scroll. Yep, here we go. Identify common goals. You're in need of a family, because I think the scripts are so important. That's another thing that I do in the videos. What do you say? You're important in the family. I want to be the family to care for your child. That's identifying the common goals, the common needs. I want to be there for my grandson, and I also want to be there for you as my son or daughter. That's that strength in kinship care. Scroll on down to the next one, if you would, roll. Acknowledge the birth parent's power, influence, and importance. This will be easier if you use your power and influence with the child. This will be easier for the child if you decide to accept our help in caring for the children. The children need to see your influence and involvement in how they are being raised and cared, and being raised for. Here's the other piece that I saw a caregiver do that, which was to get buy-in. And if you scroll down to that next one, bro, because I think that next one looks at buy-in. There we go. The children can be in a home where you can monitor their safety and well-being, and you can have input into their care. Back to that script again. You have the time to do what you need to do to show you are able to care for your children. The buy-in then is you have to be okay for the children to be okay. The buy-in again is being able to make inputs. And what I saw a caregiver that was so cool, she was able to say to the birth parent, being a parent and showing you're a parent doesn't start when they live with you. It starts when they live with me. They need to see you setting the rules, setting the discipline, setting up the structure, setting up the chores, setting up the benefits, the rewards. They need to see that happening now, so it won't feel strange and new when they start living with you. Because right now they're looking at me to do all that. They need to start looking at you, and they need to see that you make a difference and have power here, just like you will when they go home with you. So I thought that was a real interesting approach of that caregiver in terms of getting buy-in, so that the birth parent can see the benefit of cooperating and co-parenting once the children leave. That next one, Ro. Identify and dismantle. Conversation. Since the children have been here, we haven't been able to. And then talk about the care and the cooperation. Talk about the respect. Or talk about the past. We didn't speak correctly to each other, we were rude to each other, we disrespected to each other. And then that next one row, if you would, then talks about what you're going to do differently. Take the first step. From now on, I'm going to be courteous to you, respectful, civil, and caring because I know you care. And I'm going to call, I'm going to text you, I'm going to let you know what's going on in front of the children. And here's the other piece that goes with that. And the children are going to see me do these things in front, and I'm going to do these things in front of the children because they need to know that these things are tied into children needing to see that we're okay in order for them to feel okay. That next one, Rob, is a partnership. We've got to be okay. This gives the motivation for the partnership. We've got to be okay for the kids to be okay. We've got to be stable in order for the kids to be stable. The children need to see us cooperate as a team so that they'll feel safe and stable. Let's set up guidelines for handling conflicts because there are going to be conflicts, there are going to be arguments. How do we argue? How do we fight in this family? That may sound strange, but yeah, how do we argue? How do we disagree? Because they need to see models of handling conflicts, models of coming to solution without violence, especially if they're coming from families where there's been that legacy of violence and anger. And this next one, Ro, I know this sounds real therapeutic, but I can only imagine how hard it must be to have your children with you. We're talking about caregivers being able to be empathetic and make connections. And it may start with you asking that caregiver, how do you think you would have felt if the child was taken from you? Even if it's your fault, how would you feel? Because if they can identify those feelings, then they can use that conversation with you to make that connection with the birth parent. Even if there's their fault, even if they don't deserve to have the children, even if they did the abuse, how would you still feel? And then make that connection. And that last bullet, please remember, I not only want to support you in your role as the children's parents, but I also want to support you in my life as my son. This is unique to kinship care. Foster parents and adoptive parents can't talk like this. Relative caregivers can. Make them aware of their strength and what's unique about kinship care and how to use that. So that case manager, yeah, not only is it just to set up these approaches, but also identify what's unique as a kinship care and what their strength is. And I think for case managers, if you notice how I wrote this, these approaches, if you think about how we write our notes and how we set up case plans, I was thinking of goal, co-parenting. Two, the approaches. That's where you kind of put down what your tasks are. And then three, the scripts were what was the observable, what were the action behaviors that you wanted from the caregiver. So you can actually take these PowerPoints with you if you can, and actually develop your whole case plans for interventionists, for therapists, because that's my background as a family therapist. Again, that was the mindset that I did when I wrote up these PowerPoints, where your goal was, for some people, it was use of legacy. And then I would look at approaches around legacies, and the scripts are the action items that you would have for the caregivers. And your role as a manager or as a therapist was to prepare enable, empower, those two words we use all the time, to be able to, perform and enter these dialogues and scripts. The next one, bro, I think that might be the last one. Right. The other part is a summary. Okay. No, we don't have to do this. Let me just open it up for questions. Because I know.
Thank you, Dr. Crumbley.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, you have a number of them. So what if contact with the parents makes the child want to return to the parents despite it not being safe? How can the caregiver handle that tension?
Mm-hmm. Well, first, I think it starts off with preparing the child for the feelings that they're going to have when they meet and have contact with the birth parent. Let them know in advance that you're going to want to go back and see them, because you can miss somebody that you love, even if they did hurt you, or you can miss somebody that and love someone that you knew wasn't helpful or good to you. So we expect that, and this is how we're going to handle it. So prepare them for the feelings, and then talk about how you're going to handle the feelings, okay? And how you're going to handle the grief and the loss when they had that. You can cry, you can talk to mom about those feelings. Also engage the parent in soothing the child around those feelings. So it's not all on the caregiver. So it's the caregiver and the child having a plan for helping the child anticipate the feelings and then being involved in the loss and grief process in terms of implementing the plan for handling the feelings.
Thank you, Dr. Crumbley. This is going back to earlier in the presentation about when you talked about contact people.
Yes.
And so doesn't having the parent as a contact person cause the child to lament about not having physical contact with the parent? And how do you handle that?
Well, you know, a lot of times it comes off with, do the benefits outweigh the losses? That's the theory that I would use. That's how I would answer that question and make that decision. You know, does the benefits outweigh the losses? Can the child live with the losses that they're going to be experiencing and feeling? Can you, as a caregiver, deal with the expression of losses that the children would have, the holes punched in the walls, whatever it is? You know, so that's how I would answer that question. And if you come up with the benefits outweigh the losses, then it goes right back to preparation by you and by the birth parent, talking about how the child is going to have those feelings and how the child is going to cope with those feelings. But a lot of times it's benefits matching the losses. If it's going to cause the child more trauma, then don't do it. You know, back off of it. You know, if there's going to be, you know, negative consequences, then the child isn't ready for it. Back to that criteria that we talked to earlier. You know, there may be times when the answer should be no contact.
And in that vein, should the caregiver ask the child first if they're interested in interactions with the parents?
It's funny. If that child, I've seen caregivers try it that way. And I've seen the children not make contacts because they're such empaths, and they don't want to make the caregiver get upset. They don't want the caregiver to feel jealous. They don't want the caregiver to feel, you know, betrayed, or they don't want to take the chance of the caregiver feeling negative, or they picked up on the caregiver not wanting them to have contact with the birth parents. So a lot of times you can't always take the child's lead. So it may be the caregiver being able to say, look, I don't mind if you see mom and dad. Let's answer the phone. It's okay. I don't mind if you know, and then the children need to test it, to need to see it in order to believe it. So you may need to, and they're going to say, no, I don't want, but that instinct to get that feeling as though they're watching you the whole time. You're talking to mom and dad, watching the interaction to see if it's okay for them to make that connection. So yes, I think many times you want to take the children's leads, but be prepared for the fact that many times you may have to take the lead in order for the children to feel safe. They may not want to drink water until they see you drink the water, before they know it's okay to drink the water. Okay, you do it first. So a lot of times that's what's going on in any cases. Sometimes there is legitimate anger. Children are going through their loss and grief issues with parents that have hurt them or traumatized them. So a lot of times it may be you saying, okay, you don't have to be around them, but I'm going to still call mom and dad. So you are the example of the interaction, of the co-parenting. They may not have contact with the kids, but they may still be co-parenting around setting up rules, consequences, chores, expectations. And the caregiver can say, I talked to mom and dad, and this is what they wanted to do. So the mom and dad involved in the caretaking doesn't necessarily have to be directly with the child, but have an indirect impact on the child. I talked with your mom and dad, and this is what we decided. I talked with your mom and dad, and this is what's going to happen. And I talked to your mom and dad. So the co-parent can occur without the child being involved if they're not ready for the involvement.
So as caseworkers and professionals in the lives helping these folks co-parent, there's all the confidentiality issues and things. How do caseworkers help guide the caregivers in sharing information about the parents? Like, what is appropriate to share? How should they best determine what to share about whatever the issue is with the parent?
Mm-hmm. You know what I found that was a lot easier for the caregiver and also facilitated a lot of the healing for the children is being able to get the birth parents to disclose that confidential information. That's where I would start as a case manager. You start, if you're talking about information that's confidential, one, first, making sure that the children can handle it, and two, involving the caregiver. It's information about them that they need to be able to share with the children and get them to understanding that it's a bonding and an attachment process for them being able to share that with the children. Even if the children are angry, it's still a bonding and an attachment process because you go through the anger with the children and you share the hurt. You know that old saying, what doesn't kill you, make it stronger. So to be able to give the children permission to be angry, give the children permission to ask those questions, give the children permission to grieve and ask, why did you do that? And then being strong enough to go through the pain and take responsibility and to not, not redirect or misdirect the information. Yeah. So I would start with getting caregivers. I'm starting with not the caregiver necessarily, but getting the birth parent strong enough to share that confidential information so that the children can heal with them. It affects their attachment, their bonding, and their credibility. If they don't, because I'm asking an awful lot for birth parents to be able to do that, then yeah, right, it falls on the caregiver. Here's what I found was helpful with the caregivers. Caregivers being able to get permission and letting birth parents know what they're telling the children and how they're telling the children. And here's the important part of the co-parenting. How are we going to explain, back to that issue again, how are we going to explain to the children why they're with me, why they're in care, why you did what you did, so that we're all on the same page. And yes, I'm willing to leave you on the pedestal and take you down slowly. I'm not just gonna cold drop you, from being a great parent to an awful parent. Children's identity is directly connected to how they feel about their parents. So you have to bring down the birth parents slowly as you're disclosing information based on what the children can handle. You share that process with the birth parent, what the story is going to be, what the explanation is going to be, who's going to tell the children what. That's how I would deal with the confidential information or the hurtful information too.
Thank you, Dr. Crumbley.
Mhm.
So we've talked about, asking the children if they want to see the parents. Now, what happens if a child doesn't want to see or speak to the parents?
Well, I think you have to respect that. I think you have to respect that. And then talk to the children about why. Why don't they? Or what are the questions and the fears that they have that they need to bring up with the parents? Are they ready to ask those questions, or do you need to ask those questions through me or through the case manager? Because you can still facilitate the common communication without having to see them. I might even get away totally from the you have to do a face-to-face to, how can we talk through letters, through text? So it's about the communication, and the contact becomes the issue, not the face-to-face, because you stonewall right then. It turns into a power struggle. Get away from the power struggle if we talk about how can we talk in a way that makes you feel safe? How can we communicate in a way that makes you feel safe? Get out the power struggle.
Thank you, Dr. Crumbley. So with our last few minutes here, I'm going to revisit that question you asked me to table. And I think we've talked about it in quite a bit, but just to bring home the point, what are some instances when you would not recommend co-parenting?
Yeah. I think I would not recommend co-parenting if starting with the child, because that's how we just ended that last question. If the child is not prepared, well, maybe qualify that. I would not recommend face-to-face co-parenting if the contact is going to traumatize the child. You can still co-parent at a distance. I learned that from working with incarcerated parents. And you had parents doing life. You had parents on death row that we were still co-parenting with, down to talking to them about dating, going out, sexuality, sexual orientation, the whole gamut. So it's face to face. So if they're saying they're not ready and don't want to do it, I wouldn't push it, but then I would then still move towards how are we going to keep communication going on between them. Another would be are the children going to be too embarrassed to have contact with the parents at that point? That we're moving more towards face to face. If the parents, and I don't mean to, and I'm not saying that it's discomfort. I'm not blaming the parent for not being able to be presentable or to not be embarrassing, because maybe in their lifestyle or because of their physical disability or challenges, it may cause them not to be presentable, or they may not, or they may have the tremors, and children are afraid of tremors, or they may have Tourette's, and the birth parent is bursting out with that language. Yeah, so those embarrassing moments that the children can't handle, yeah, you need to also be thinking about, no, that might not be the case. If the birth parent is not able to keep the boundaries and they're going to go into role reversals with the children, that's another no. I would definitely be pretty emphatic about that. In terms of being able to maintain boundaries and appropriate relationships, and being able to get the children out of parenting roles that are inappropriate. Yeah, that also might be a very, very black and white situation in terms of no. If we're looking at safety issues for the children, I don't think that's any discussion. Abductions, running away, I think that's a no. If we're looking at caregivers sabotaging the authority of the birth parent, I think that becomes clearly a no, because again, you're making the environment for the child unsafe and unstable. If we're talking about the caregiver, the birth parents colluding with the children around safety issues in the caregiver's home and rules in the home, again, I think you're coming up with some pretty black and white emphatic no answers to those kind of questions. I think if we're looking at the caregiver sabotaging the relationship between the birth parent and the child, I think that becomes a situation where no, and I've even seen that go so far as to having children removed from the home when we're looking at reunification. So that might become not only a no item, but possibly a removal consideration that you have to think about. So those situations I would be thinking of: embarrassment, safety, boundary issues, um, reunification issues, supporting each other's authority. Yeah, I think those can become black and white issues around.
Well, thank you, Dr. Crumbley.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish you could see the chat, because people are incredibly appreciative of
Oh,
everything.
I wasn't reading. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you shouldn't be, but know that, yeah, you're getting a lot of positive feedback as always, and we're so appreciative to you for providing this webinar to everyone today. And the team will drop again in the chat the survey link. So we ask that you take the survey, if you wouldn't mind, so that we can continue to respond to the needs of all of you and provide you the best content we can. And just thank you so much again, Dr.
Oh, and Anna, thanks for promoting my training.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so anybody who wants to look at the other part of the training and the other modules, just hit, drcrumbley.com and call me. That sounds so unprofessional, didn't it? Anna? Call me.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. It sounds so warm and welcoming. And I do know that Dr. Crumbley is one of our subject matter experts here at the network. So you have access to him through us as well, and through that technical assistance form that's also been dropped in the chat. And you'll get all these materials in a follow-up email. So again, thank you, Dr. Crumbley.
Oh, thank you, Anna. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll ask Ro to shut us down now.
Oh, thank you too, Ro.
Yeah, thank you, Ro. And thank you